Good morning on this Good Friday here. As you can tell, I'm not behind a microphone. Father Kuna will be giving the homily today at 3 o'clock here at St. Catherine's. But I thought what I would do is just give a little off-the-cuff exegesis of the Passion narrative, John chapters 18 and 19, as a way of preparation for the service at 3 o'clock. It'd be a good, kind of like a good preview, just so you don't go into the Passion narrative ice cold here. I'm kind of doing this off the cuff, so hopefully I can have a nice flow and make sense of all this. Please go to the service at 3 o'clock. Don't treat this as like, well, okay, I got my spiritual thing today for Good Friday. Really, if you can, really make the effort to come to the service at 3. If you can't make it at 3 because of work obligations, try to make the Stations of Cross that we have at 7 o'clock tonight. But here we go. So, yesterday, if I also would recommend that you listen to my Holy Thursday homily, which is also posted. Really focused a lot in on the Garden at Gethsemane and Jesus' arrest, which is how we ended our Holy Thursday service. We had the procession with the Eucharist, and then we just had that prayerful silence, being with our Lord in the garden. And so we'll pick it up there where, the Passion narrative begins with Judas and a band coming, but in John's case, Jesus goes out to meet them. So they didn't catch Jesus by surprise here, at least in John's version of this. Jesus goes out to meet them and says that big statement, I am, and they all fall to the ground. It's also in John's narrative where Peter cuts off the ear of Malchus, which then Jesus heals the ear himself. But then they're arrested, and they bring him to the high priest called Annas, which is, again, different than the synoptics. You also got to know that in John's gospel, he spends very little time with Jesus in front of the Jewish authorities. I mean, the majority of John's gospel is Jesus and Pontius Pilate. One of the big differences of John from the synoptics. The synoptics focus a lot on Jesus in front of the high priest, less on Pontius Pilate. John has a very lengthy discussion with Jesus and Pontius Pilate. And so they're brought to Annas, who was the former high priest. He's the father-in-law of the current high priest, Caiaphas. So kind of like one of those situations where, the dad steps down from the business, but the dad is still around in the business, still influential. So Annas is still an influential figure, even though he's not the current high priest. Caiaphas is his son-in-law. And one thing that I find very interesting, as he's speaking with Jesus, Jesus is telling him, look, I spoke openly in the temple area, and you didn't do anything. And then he says, ask my companions. They heard me. They'll tell you what I said. And what's happening as Jesus is telling Annas that? Peter is denying Jesus 3 times. Just another instance of John's irony that happens throughout the whole gospel. Jesus is telling Annas to hey, ask my companions, ask my disciples. They'll tell you what I said. And Peter's outside in the courtyard denying that he even knows who Jesus is. Very, very interesting. From after Peter's denial, they lead Jesus early in the morning to Pontius Pilate. And notice in this conversation with Pontius Pilate, you have a contrast of kings. You have Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman official, and then you have these subtle allusions to the kingship of Jesus. But again, not a king that we're accustomed to. This is a king that is beaten and humiliated. And so the whole process begins with Pilate asking Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus neither, he doesn't deny it. He kind of affirms it. Talks about his kingdom, how his kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom is like no other. Then Pilate finally says, "Well, then you are a king." And then Jesus says, "You say that I am a king." And for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. And Pilate says, well, what is truth? And then we have Jesus and Barabbas. Pilate, according, at least in John's gospel, there must have been a custom where each year Pilate releases a criminal during Passover. And Jesus, it's now Jesus and Barabbas. Barabbas' name literally means son of the Father. So again, another beautiful, beautiful metaphor here where we have two sons of the Father. We have the one son of the Father who was a criminal and a murderer, and another son of the Father who gave sight to the blind and raised a person from the dead, and is here to show forth the love of the Father. We know how the story goes. The people want Barabbas released. Pilate then has Jesus scourged. The soldiers mock him. They put a royal cloak on him. They crown him with thorns. Again, this is where Jesus really embraces his title as king when he's being humiliated. Wearing a cloak, wearing a crown of thorns, being mocked by the soldiers and being beaten by them. He's then brought out, again, in his quote-unquote royal garb. Pontius Pilate brings him out, sits him down. Behold the man. Pilate exclaims, and the people what? The people exclaim, crucify him, crucify him. They want Barabbas. Pilate says, should I release to you the king of the Jews? No, we want Barabbas. We want the murderer. We want the son of the Father who's a wicked person. And then finally they say, at the end, should I release your king? And they say what? We have no king but Caesar. Wow. Imagine, again, a first century Jew saying that. Throughout the whole Testament, it was always this allegiance to the king. It all started with the people's desire to have a king. And the one thing that made them so difficult was that they were so attached to their heritage and to their faith and to their religion. They were always such a nuisance to those that occupied them, including the Romans. And now here, presented with the real Son of the Father, Jesus Christ, they say, we have no king but Caesar. They give their alliance over to the Romans. I always just fascinated by that line, especially again when you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, you read the prophets of just how loyal they are, and yet when God comes to them, when their true shepherd comes to them, they're so easy to let it go. And then Jesus is led towards the crucifixion. Again, we hear the expression in John's Gospel, the message written in 3 languages. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Pilate stands by what he's written. And then we see the soldiers taking the cloak, which would have been a priestly garment. So not only do we have a king, not only do we have a victim, a lamb, but we also have a priest, all in one shot right there, And so John tells us that they didn't tear the garment, which fulfills the prophecy. Then we have that beautiful passage of Jesus with Mary and the beloved disciple, again, only in John's gospel, where Jesus, as he's slowly suffocating to death. Every breath is of vital importance to Jesus here. It's at this moment, as he's struggling to breathe, he gives his mother to his beloved disciple, which the church fathers always saw that to represent us, the beloved disciple, receiving Mary, our mother, into our hearts, and Mary receiving us into our heart. Right there, I would say that, along with the Annunciation, really the foundation of our just our devotion to our Blessed Mother there. Jesus is then given wine at the end. He says, I thirst. The thirst for souls, the thirst for humanity. That's why he's doing all this. He desires to have his heart quenched by the repentant sinner. And then he's given common wine, and he drinks the wine, which again, makes an allusion back to the Passover meal. During the Passover meal, they would have had 4 glasses of wine, which would have been drank throughout the whole liturgy. Jesus and the apostles leave after the third one. So the third wine, which would have been, I believe it would have been the wine of passion, Jesus would have drank. That would have been the wine that he was associated with his blood, okay, in the institution of the Eucharist. The 4th wine would have been drunk after they sung the song. So they leave the meal, they go out into the garden, they sing these Halah psalms. I believe it's like from Psalms 110 to 113. And then afterwards, they would have drank the 4th cup. But they didn't get to the 4th cup. At that point, then, Jesus is arrested. Now he drinks the 4th cup, when he's on the cross. The culmination of all things. Of God's love and providence right there. That's what the 4th cup resembled. And now Jesus says it is finished. The process of the Passover is now officially finished. The new Exodus has begun, which again will ultimately lead to the right hand of the Father. And then he bows his head and he hands over his spirit. Throughout this whole gospel, and John, especially John's passion narrative, Jesus is in charge. It begins with him going to Judas and to the people who were going to arrest him. It's allowing Jesus. He tells Pontius Pilate, if my Father would will it, he would send his army to rescue him. He tells Pontius Pilate that ultimately he's kind of in control of these things, because he's a priest who's offering his very life for us. And then here, as he dies, it's almost as if he says, okay, I'm going to die now, and then he bows his head and dies. This was all part of the Lord's plan here, in our sufferings, in his sufferings, but unfortunately in ours too. I know we don't like to think like that. It's not always the best advice, this is what God wills, but you just got to remember, all of our sufferings, we united with the passion of Christ, it's going to lead to our own glorification as well. If we're standing right there with the cross, with Mary, our mother, united our sufferings to him, it's going to lead to glory. Maybe not in this life, but in life to come, most definitely. 2 more things. Then we get the pierced with the blood and water, as I mentioned yesterday in my homily. When Jesus is in the garden, he would have seen the eastern side of the temple, and from there would have poured out, as they were washing away all the blood of the sacrifice, that blood and water mixture would have flown out of the east side of the temple. That's in Jesus' vision here. But now we have the new temple, as Jesus tells us in chapter 2 of John's Gospel. We have the new temple, and from the side of Jesus, blood and water is flowing out of that. The church fathers has always saw that. I believe I posted it this morning from John Chrysostom. Always saw that as the sacraments of baptism and Eucharist pouring forth from the side of Jesus. It's where the bride Eve, that is the church, comes from Jesus' side. This is where the church is formed, and then the church is given its breath of life at Pentecost. But right here is the formation of the church, flowing out of the side of Jesus, in that blood and water mixture. They didn't break the legs of Jesus, as we hear then. Again, the Paschal lamb, the legs were not broken. It was a pure, unblemished lamb for the Passover. And here, not a bone is broken in Jesus to fulfill the scriptures. And then finally, he's laid to rest in a garden, So the story of this passion begins in a garden. It ends in a garden. And then on Easter Sunday, we're going to see it once again beginning in a garden, making an allusion back to Adam and Eve, where we can say all of our mess begins, right? Where the first sin happens in the garden when Adam was walking in communion with God. He chose to turn away from God in that sin of pride, to try to live a life away from God. And now here, God is trying to restore it, the new Adam. And we'll see more of that restoration in our Easter homilies. But Anyways, okay, 15 minutes, not bad. Again, I kind of quickly went through it, but hopefully, if I would recommend reading chapters 18 and 19 before you go to the service. Meditate on it, read it slowly, and hopefully you'll even get some more insight. Not to mention more grace and prayers and blessings at today's service. Again, God bless you, and hopefully you have a blessed and continual Easter Triduum.